2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Been doing a lot of fun segments because I took the month of July off doing all the Hall of Fame stuff and thinking of who am I going to have on. And I had this guy on back in June. You talk about the reunion of all reunions. Steve Seftel is the guy whose jersey I generally wear. I have 2 Skipjacks jerseys. I have one that sort of fits me a little bit where all the lettering is sort of peeling off, as you can see. And then I have like a legitimate patch-on Skippies. And, you know, I know they wear the red at home now in the NHL, but this used to be a road jersey. And this is a Steve Seftel Skipjacks jersey. It's got blood stains on it from what I can see, puck stains on here. I don't know. Probably got some chewing tobacco on here before it's all over it. And we welcome from the hinterlands of Canada, or just near Toronto, actually, but not Kitchener. We welcome him back in as now author Steve Seftel, and my friend since the 1980s, going on 30 years. Steve Seftel, the book is Shattered Ice. Dude, how are you? It's so good to hear that you're doing well and releasing books and catching up with friends and autographing books. I see how much fun you're having because it wasn't fun living the journey of the book, was it?
Hi, morning, Nestor. It's great to be with you. Well, the journey, there was plenty of good stories in the journey. It's a combination of both. But I'm joining you from Waterloo, Ontario. We've had a fantastic summer here in Ontario. It's been hot and sunny and very little rain, so... Yeah, it's been a terrific summer, and it's been a lot of fun, as you mentioned, starting promoting the book over the last couple of months, and it's out there now, and I've been doing some interviews and with newspaper and radio, and it's great to be back with you again, that's for sure.
Well, I know we misconnected for 30 years. I don't know at what point my jersey with your name on it, showed up on your timeline, and someone said, hey, Steve, some guy's wearing, like, your jersey on TV somewhere, right? And I know Doug McLean had a role in this, and Doug McLean apparently shouted me out on Canadian television at some Maple Leafs Caps game 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't even remember exactly how I found you. I had looked for you on LinkedIn and had wondered what had happened to you because I acquired your jersey in Portland, Maine in February of 2001. And 3 months ago, we sort of connected. We did some radio. You could find it in the buyatoyota.com audio vault on our Facebook or YouTube. And you promised me that this thing was going to be coming, Shattered Ice. And I'm holding it up here, and it's actually a real book. I know what you look like now. I got the internet, Steve. I see the updated picture of what number 14 looks like here. And just a wonderful picture of you out on a pond on the back of the book. And the foreword written by our mutual friend, Doug McLean, and one of your mentors and one of my foils in all the years of covering hockey. But I want you to run me through the book here. I mean, we're at going on 320 pages of really memoirs. And as I said, a very difficult story for you to tell because you've really struggled for a long time, right?
Yeah. Shattered Ice, I started writing about 18 months ago now, and I pushed a lot of people away in the hockey world over the last several years with, including yourself, with some of the mental illness I've been dealing with. And I initially started to write the book because Shattered Ice was, I didn't want the memories of hockey to be lost, and I thought I robbed my children, Calvin and Nick. I have 2 sons.
How old?
Of a lot of my hockey stories.
How old are your kids?
And initially, my oldest son, Calvin, is 25, and he's a Toronto firefighter, and my youngest son, Nick, is 23, and he's attending Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario.
Okay.
And I thought I'd robbed them a lot of the memories, and I didn't want those memories to be lost. And that was the initial catalyst, but shortly after, a month after I began writing it, I had a mental, I'll call breakdown, where I was physically stuck in bed and just not doing well at all. And then the book became therapy. So Shattered Ice really became my therapy, and I had a lot of time on my hands. I was home trying to get myself well again.
And you've lived a very sort of normal Canadian life for a Canadian hockey player who had a cup of coffee and had a really nice minor league career and had a little trail of hockey success. But you went back and got a job and worked in the you've lived a very normal life after your hockey, right? To some degree, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I went back. It was tough. The toughest part was right after hockey, trying to figure out who you are. And, leaving sports is tough for any athlete, and it leads to, in my case, it led to some depressive feelings. I was already suffering with some mental illness, and that just exacerbated everything, and it plunged me into a deep depressive state, and which really took about 20 years to kind of completely fully manifest itself.
And in getting help, right, and in reaching out, I think obviously there was always a stigma about this, right? But I think that's lifted really in the last 5 or 10 years. Maybe you could speak to that and all sorts of social stigmas, right? Or the LGBTQ community, or, anything that would be marijuana as a stigma. There's all sorts of things that 25 years ago we would have never have talked about, would have thought about on Facebook or in a social media or in a place where you could reach to help in the same area, going even back to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm sure as a hockey player you had alcoholic teammates. I know you had alcoholic teammates. People reaching for something back when they're 20 years old and don't know where to go. I think in 2020, right, we're at a different place in the world about these things that you can feel comfortable talking about it because so many others before you have talked about mental health challenges and written about them as therapy and then marched on and lived really wonderful lives after their 50th birthday, which we both are at right now, and hoping that we have 40, 50 more years of great life ahead of us. But you got to get through these challenges, and the first part is identifying them and then finding and facilitating help and being open, having an open heart to get that kind of help that you need.
Yeah, we have a terrific mental health leader up here named Michael Landsberg. He works for the Sports Network, as a matter of fact, and he started he's a terrific speaker, and he has a phrase, "It's sick, not weak." And I think for years the stigma of mental illness was part of it was we saw it as weakness, and not an actual legitimate illness, and that really struck me when 2 years ago. One of the first things I was asked to do when I was going through my own therapy was to watch Michael Landsberg speak on YouTube, and I watched him, and that was the first time in my life I heard someone openly speaking about mental illness, and it was jaw-dropping for me at that moment because it's something I had suppressed for decades because it wasn't acceptable to talk. It wasn't comfortable. We didn't talk about it in dressing rooms, at family get-togethers. It just was not discussed. So to hear it coming out of someone's mouth and verbalized was really an eye-opener for me, and it was a relief as well. And I guess when you mentioned, we're at 50 years old now. I have to credit my wife when I was going through some therapy as well at that time. She said to me, "You've lived like this for the last 3 decades. Do you want to continue or do you want to live differently?" And I agreed that I wanted to change and live differently. And now I've become an advocate through the book where I'm out there kind of leading the charge. And you mentioned Doug McLean. When I saw Doug back in March and asked him to write the foreword for Shattered Ice, I could hardly get the words out of my mouth that I was suffering from mental illness. And since then, it's become much more comfortable to discuss, and just like I'm doing with you today, we're here talking about it, trying to end that stigma.
Well, I'll tell you what, the book is out. It's Shattered Ice. You can, if you've wondered what happened to Steve Seftel, and before it's all over with, I'll sing the Skipjacks fight song for you, Steve. But I've been wearing your jersey the last couple of years and having some fun. And I know you said you saw it the night I was with Tomlin in Pittsburgh at the playoff game. And you wore 37 as a cap, and you had this picture. You played in a handful of games in the National Hockey League, and then went back home. And I guess for anyone that wonders about your journey, and someone like me that, I met my wife in 2003. I acquired this jersey in 2001, and I met my wife at an American Hockey League game, if you can believe that.
Is that right?
I met her in Manchester, New Hampshire. She was a season ticket holder there for the now defunct Manchester Monarchs, or as they say there, the Monarchs. And I met her at a hockey game, and I met her at a minor league hockey game. And Bruce Boudreau was the coach then of the Manchester Monarchs. There were some young players, Jared Smithson, who went on to play for the Nashville Predators, and a couple of guys that played for the Kings when the Kings were good a few years ago as well. And I've had this jersey, and she would always say, Seftel, she said, you keep up with all your football players, all the rock stars, all the baseball, all the friends. Doug McClain, Terry Murray, they're all still in my life to some degree. I'm once removed from Terry. I miss him. Terry, if you're out there, call me. I want to have you on the show. But I've chased people around, and I saw you on LinkedIn a number of years ago and threw a Vine out, and a lot of people get on LinkedIn and never go back and check it again, so I'm never offended when people don't hit me back, but I always love to know, like Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story, right? Like, I've worn your jersey on my back for 2 decades, and people would say, what? And I'm like, I knew Steve well, and now I got a whole book, right, to catch up on everything. Tell me about writing the book and the process of writing the book. And I've written 4 books myself, so I know the emotion, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the up all night, the leave me alone. As I call it, the Jack Torrance, if you're familiar with the Shining reference. You go into a room and you just, you sort of get into that mode of like, I'm putting this out. And I don't know how many times you've sitting to write a book. It's always a difficult process. I applaud you for getting it to the finish line, bro, and getting it to a point where I can hold it.
I have to share a funny story or a story from the book for your fans. And one thing I've mentioned too, I've really enjoyed following your Baltimore Positives.
Thanks, man.
I love the initiative, and so for the Baltimore fans, I have to share. You just mentioned the Skipjacks fight song. I might hold you to it. You're going to sing it.
Oh, I'll sing it.
And
yeah.
I know it can be found online. I think it's also on YouTube. I've listened to it from time to time over the years, but
it doesn't sound the same as when Jeff Amdur and I sing it together, So, Jeff is Jeff is the guy that had the fireman's hat on, right? Used to run up. He's still in the upper deck at Oriole game. Yeah, Jeff's still here, man. He's on Facebook, so you can give Jeff Amdur a shout out. The biggest Skipjack fan I know this side of Howard Share. So yes,
I have a chapter in Shattered Ice called "Win You Baltimore Skipjacks," inspired by the Skipjacks fight song, which I do have the lyrics to the song in its entirety in that chapter, and I talk about a game against the Springfield Indians where we put 8 goals in on them, and I remember I just talk about how they would have had to hear that song 8 times plus at the end when the final buzzer rang, and how for visiting teams it probably wasn't very enjoyable to have to listen to, especially when the crowd would yell to fight, 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 and I'd say how it was definitely a unique song, but it became unique to your, like other things, to your home building, and I loved it by the end of my, it was just fantastic for the home team, but not so much for the visitors.
My favorite chapter is the Goon from Baltimore. They've called me that from time to time, Steve, just so you know.
Well, my friends in Hershey, I was never a fan favorite up in Hershey when we played the Bears back in the day when they were with the Flyers, and that's a classic story, which also our friend Doug McClain has shared at least 2 times up here on Hockey Central on Sportsnet, the show he's a host of, a contributor on. And, it's a classic story. I guess I'll give you a brief overview for the listeners. My first NHL game was in Detroit, and it was the season after the Caps had fired Brian Murray. And Brian ended up in Detroit with Doug McClain as following him along. And they were there as coach and assistant coach.
Had a pretty good team there, as I remember, yes.
Yeah, Sergei Fedorov was there, and Steve Yzerman, and, of course, Bob Probert. And so my first NHL game is in Detroit against my former coaches from Washington. And I'm skating around in warm-up, quite nervous, as you would be for your first NHL game, and I'm thinking, I saw Doug on the home bench, and I thought, well, this is a good strategy. I'll go say hi to him, and he'll give me some comforting words that might just break
Dude, I can only imagine what Dougie might have said to you at that point. Like, probably something like, we're going to send 3 goons after you tonight or something, right?
Well, I was hoping he'd say congratulations or, good for you, kid. That's what I was kind of anticipating. Something to that nature, but so as I came towards the bench, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Seth, I told Probert you're the goon called up from Baltimore." And of course, that went right to my legs. And and go back to the dressing room. Terry Murray calls out the starting lineups, and he says Hunter, Seftel, Drew. So I'm starting my first NHL game, which is of course every player's dream, kind of your starting.
And next to a
But I line
legend
up
like
on
John
that.
Druce, no less, right?
Yeah, it was a thrill for sure. And then to play with Dale Hunter, who, we all look. He was almost the face of the franchise at that time, along with Rod Langway. So I line up on the blue line for the national anthem, and I'm hearing the Star Spangled Banner, and just helmets off and standing straight. And I look across because I want to know who I'm up against, and don't I see number 24, white Bob Probert, and I know he's a right winger, so we are going to be lined up shoulder to shoulder. But long story short is I read his book years later, and unless you had unless you were a legitimate contender, he wasn't going to fight some rookie that he had never heard of. So I really had nothing to worry about, but I certainly didn't know it at the time.
Well, that's part of the intimidation of hockey. Steve Seftel is our guest. The book is Shattered Ice, with a foreword by Doug McLean, our mutual friend, and Steve telling his story of his time in Baltimore and being a skipjack and singing the Skipjacks fight song and all. So when you think of your time in Baltimore, what do you think of when you think of being, certainly not me running around with a notebook and Tyler Larder and, I'm trying to think of all the guys that were your Robin Bawa and all your teammates back in the day.
I think that's a good point, the teammates. And you mentioned that earlier. I'd pushed a lot of guys away because of what I was dealing with, and I've spent my last few months this summer reconnecting with them. And through
whoa! You got phone numbers on all the old guys now? Is that what you're telling me?
No, it's really been through social media and
really
just people coming forward and talking, sending me notes. Hey, I know. For example, I got in touch with Chris Felix recently.
How is Chris Felix? See, this is where I'm gonna roll it. Can I put my jersey on and do this? So here, we're gonna do a catching up with every skipjack you've caught up with. I want a story with just the people. I'm not gonna read any names. You tell me if you've talked to Mike Richard. I need to know it. If you've seen Jimmy Rivnak. By the way, Sean Simpson and I are close. So I mean, I see Simmer.
Yeah, I've had some communication with Simmer.
Simmer and I are close. So I mean, so Simmer will watch this. Simmer calls me from Ottawa. Simmer's in love. I sent Simmer up to PEI with some recommendations, and I don't know. So give it to me, man. Have you heard from Kent Painter? Hook me up, Seftel.
No,
I need to hear from some guys.
I've had some communication with my old roommate Steve Malte. He's in the book and several. He's in Shattered Ice as because we spent 2 years living together, so he's part of some of my funnier stories. So I had some communication with him. He's living in the U.S. and so Sean Simpson, Chris Felix, my old junior teammate, not from Baltimore, but Scott Pearson, who was a Maple Leafs prospect and player. I played, and then of course Doug McLean and I have been close, and we've been speaking. In your field, I've been in contact with our old play-by-play man, Kenny Albert, which was a thrill for me.
Yeah, he tweeted
Kenny read the book.
Yeah, and I retweeted Kenny because he got the book, read the book, tweeted the book, and and Kenny and I have remained close. Kenny's the reason I'm on the radio, right? Do you know that story?
No, I did not know that.
Well, I did a whole segment. I did several segments on it, but the one you'd want to check out was the one from last year in the middle of the Stanley Cup. If you didn't know it, when Barry Trotz was in the Stanley Cup Finals last year, I did the whole tour. I went to Vegas. We did the Cup. We drank it. We did it all, right? But during that run, Kenny was getting asked a lot of questions about Barry Trotz because as much as you said Steve Malte was your roommate, Kenny Albert and Barry Trotz were roommates. So Kenny had incredible Barry Trotz riding buses in the Maritime stories and bunking together in Fredericton and Moncton and parts unknown. So Kenny had all of that going on, and Kenny was the original person on the radio who brought me in as his sidekick in December of 1991, and then I took over the show in the spring of 92, and here we are, 27 years later, and I'm still here. So Kenny's had a very good journey through the world, yes.
Another story, a favorite story of mine from Shattered Ice, is I grew up listening to Marv Albert, and he was the man for sportscasting for me growing up. And doing hockey, baseball, basketball, of course, with the famous Yes with Michael Jordan, and football. And so I love telling the story how Kenny Albert was the first professional job to my understanding, was with the Baltimore Skipjacks as our play-by-play man. Doug claims he hired him, but there's, but maybe or maybe not. But he was around when Kenny got hired, right before he went to Detroit. And to have Kenny now with what he's done, for him to contact me and against his social media, say he read the book and he thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt really good hearing that from him. And you mentioned some other guys. I also contacted Jeff. I also got in touch with Jeff Rimmer, his pictures in the book. It's a nice picture of him and I from our Caps days where he's interviewing me at the Cap Center.
Jeff and I are still in touch. And Jeff's son, Josh, is just a great guy. Lives in Toronto. And I will connect you with him because he's going to love your book as much as anybody because his dad's in it.
Yeah, and I also had some nice comments from Jeff after he finished his read where he thought it was a great read and he really enjoyed it. And then another one, just going down again, the Skipjack memory lane, I was able to reach out to Rob Laird through LinkedIn, and him and I shared some messages back and forth. This is during the summer as well. And
oh, my God, there's a picture of you in here with Sean Simpson. Simpson's got hair. Hold on. Stop everything.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm holding that up for Simmer. Look at that. Look at these guys. What a motley crew that is.
That's a great picture, too, because Jeff Greenlaw's in it and Jim Rivnack's in it, along with Simmer shaking my brother's hand at my wedding.
Oh, wow. I see Rivnack. There's Rivnack. Look at that. So, man, you're bringing back the good memories, dude. I got my Skipjacks jersey out. Steve Seftel is our guest. The book is Shattered Ice. You can get it. Tell everybody where to get it. You just go online and put Steve Seftel Shattered Ice in. It pops right up, right?
Yeah, it's available in the United States right now on Amazon.com and in Canada on Amazon.ca. It's really available through Amazon worldwide. And just tell you a funny story that one of the first books sold was purchased on Amazon.au, which is purchased in Australia. And a former Kingston Canadians friend and fan of mine, she bought the book while living, and she's in New Zealand, and she was reading it on her tablet in the downtown buses going to work in Auckland, New Zealand. So I've gone international, and yeah, the reception and from the friends and family and former fans, et cetera, has been just people like yourself it's been fantastic, and it's really been a nice for me and a healing process, and getting back in touch with all these people I haven't heard from in a long, long time has been really nice.
All right, Seftel, I'm going to make an admission here. It looks like I'm coming to Buffalo the first weekend of December for Ravens-Bills activity. There is a rumor I'm going to be sneaking across the border to worship Geddy Lee somewhere near Yorkdale or something like that. So if I get the TO, as they say, I'm going to ring you. Until then, I hope your arm gets sore signing these, selling these, talking about it, and spreading your message. And I hope some people in the league pick it up as well. And just as an aside, before I let you go, this last thing, I'm not shocked that some hockey players who didn't make it went back to Canada and had mental health issues, right? Like, so it doesn't, my heart breaks for you and for anyone else, and I see alcoholism, and I saw, we had a number 1 overall draft pick who's destitute and broke now. I saw that story a few weeks ago as well. Is there a network of help that you're aware of that's available through the league, through hockey, through Canada in some way to assist people who struggle? Because I think the star's in everybody's eyes when they're 17, right? And running off to play in the league, and everybody's going to be Wayne Gretzky, right? But all these years later, you probably would have loved to have had some access to more help, right?
Absolutely. Just recently, just a couple weeks ago, I was invited by Glenn Healy and Wendy McCreary to Toronto to the National Hockey League Alumni Association offices, and I participated in a Players Talking to Players series where they're trying to just provide some videos and education for players who are dealing with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, gambling, certain things like that, and just having players interviewed, passing on messages to other players. So that's one initiative with the alumni. But as far as individuals go, my message would be you're not alone. For too many years, I thought I was alone, and I was, again, with the stigma, afraid to talk about it, to share it. And what I've learned over the last 2 years is there is help out there, and you're not alone. You got to go get it. And so you got to go see your family doctor. From there, you got to go see For myself, I went to a psychotherapist. I talked to a psychiatrist. I got my nutrition in order with a naturopath, which I think for my healing was a big part of it. And then the support of your family. So using this holistic kind of healing method got me back on track. So that would be my message to people, is the help's out there. We are slowly eliminating the stigma, but there's still lots of work to do. But you got to go find the help, and it's out there.
Well, I'll continue to reach back to you whenever I talk hockey because, hey, I own your jersey. What can I say? You know, Shattered Ice is the book. Steve Seftel has been my friend for 3 decades, on and off, and now on again. And he's got a story to tell and is sharing it with everyone, and it's an important message. Steve, glad you're doing well, man. I'm glad. You know, I looked up Steve Malte, and you know, I remember Steve well, and I remember him going on and playing in a league and having success. I didn't realize his jerseys were retired by my friend Gene Ubriaco, Chicago Wolves. So, you know, an interesting and rich storyline of stories for all of the Skipjacks alums that you're putting together, and I hope you continue to find more of your old teammates and find some joy. Go have some fun, man. Watch a hockey game, all right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's I'm putting myself back out there, and I certainly, the reconnecting has been fantastic. Actually, I'll throw out another name. I just came to mind. I just reconnected with Tim Taylor, and he's mentioned in my book as well. We were good friends in Baltimore. He just lives down the road in Stratford.
I bet Tim Taylor has had a wonderful life. Tim was one of the more level-headed, won a cup, right? Tim was the guy that always was the team captain. He was always the guy that could help you on offense and would never hurt you on defense. And yeah, like literally, when I think of the quintessential skipjack, Tim Taylor was for me one of the greatest skipjacks.
Yeah, you're right. He had a great career, and I think about 2 Stanley Cups, and yeah, he's so it's just another example of the hockey family is still out there, and I'm just finding them one at a time.
Well, you found me, and I'm here, and as long as I'm here and you're there, we're together. So,
and we gotta, this December, I'm a Bills fan, so we might have to have a side wager on this Ravens-Bills trip you're making.
Yeah, I'll let you know how we look in November. Call me the week of the game.
That could be a big game for both teams, yeah.
Well, I mean, a big game for me either way because I'm coming back to Buffalo and eating wings and looking for my Canadian friends. And unlike some of the ugly Americans, I have a passport, so they'll let me in. They even let me into Canada without a passport. That's another story for another day. It involved me being stupid and crashing the border. But, I'm convicted, never convicted. They let me back in America at Niagara Falls. So everything worked out well for me, Steve. So, but that's another story for the football book of my future. Hey, we'll see you in December, man. Good luck with the book. We'll see you soon.
All right, thank you, Nestor.
Steve Seftel, my friend, and literally the first skipjack I ever talked to. I went to the first practice with my little notebook for the Evening Sun. Everybody was wearing Capitals stuff. I was looking for Jeff Greenlaw because he was the hotshot #1 draft pick. And I was just trying to go through the roster, figure out who was wearing what jersey, who had what face, what body style, who was left stick, right stick. And Steve Seftel was the first guy I ever met. I have his jersey, and now I have his book. Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Baltimore Positive, moving from Fadley's and Jennings and State Fair to Roos Chris with Dick Cass, Ravens president. Next Wednesday night we'll be there doing a lot of Baltimore Positive leading into September. And then we're off to Miami, we're off to Kansas City, got road trips, got fun. They'll play the World Series somewhere else, we'll watch that, then hockey will start. WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.